Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TSMU Q&A series. Long time no see. I'm your host, Mark Hubbard. I work for Lenovo Legion, and today I'm joined by an extremely special guest, Danan Flander from Golden Guardians. Danan, how's it going?
It's going good. How about you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I think we were saying in the pre-call, we're almost to Friday. We're literally almost there. So for everyone that is joining in for this Q&A, we'll be pulling questions from the TSMU Discord. So if you have a question for Danan, make sure you head on over to discord.gg/TSMU and ask your questions in the Q&A questions channel. While people are getting their questions in, Danan, why don't you go ahead and give everyone a little bit of an introduction, like what you do, where you come from, and what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the general manager of Golden Guardians. So for those who don't know, that is one of the League of Legends franchise teams. We are owned wholly, which is kind of rare, by the Golden State Warriors NBA organization. I say that's rare because a lot of teams have investment from traditional sports organizations. It's not uncommon. I think we're one of the few teams that's like just wholly owned and operated. Like I am just, an NBA organization employee. That's what I do. That's what I am. I answer to um, my supervisors at Golden State. My background is technically initially a player way back in the day. I played like everything, as everyone has played like stuff like World of Warcraft. Every game you could think of across like Super Nintendo and GameCube and all that kind of stuff when I was growing up. And then I very softly competed in a couple different games, Enemy Territory Quake Wars, and then ultimately League of Legends and like the season 0, like the beta timings into season 1, was kind of my that was my heyday. That was my time to shine. Unfortunately for me, that timing didn't line up with esports exploding. Back then, you played for like literally nothing, like $0 dues every weekend. Which is crazy because at the same time, a lot of people were like quitting their jobs and dropping out of school to pursue being a professional player. And that wasn't functional for me. I was like first generation college student in my family, attending on like a full academic ride. So I wasn't in position to just, you know, walk away from that type of offer in favor of my $0 a week esports player job. But lucky enough for me, my teammates immediately reached out with like, "Hey, now that you're not on the roster, um, and we were like scrimming 8 hours a day because we all quit our jobs. Uh, we're like really bad at like the really basic stuff. We don't know how to like book scrims. We're like show up to scrims on time. We're like oversleeping or we're like not signing up for tournaments or we just have no structure. So even though we're like 5 good players, we can't actually like show it to anyone. Can you like solve that?" And that was basically being asked, "Hey, can you be like the one of the first like esports managers back in the day, right?" Um, which is like a great, interesting question to be asked. I'm gonna be completely honest. At the time, I was like, "That sounds like the worst idea I've ever heard on the planet." You want to take away all of the fun I used to have where I played the game, and make me like just like book scrims and put stuff on a calendar for you, and like when you oversleep, call you. And they were like, "Yeah, basically." And somehow that spiraled into me working for and building out a bunch of teams in League of Legends, and as people probably kind of catch, just like working my way through different teams, building up different rosters that were successful, ultimately culminating and joining like Dignitas, Complexity, Cloud9, and at this point, Golden Guardians with Golden State.
That's fantastic. Well, I hope you're gonna be. Is it Golden State's playing? Is it Denver? Or they've got Denver in the first round, right? You gonna be watching
Yeah, I
that
think
game?
they got the Nuggets. Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, 100%. Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, Dana, we do. So the community's been pretty rapid on this one, so we do have a lot of questions. So without much more, thanks for the
Let's
intro.
get
If
into
you're
it.
cool with it, I'm gonna go ahead and jump right into the community questions.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So the first one is from Noxwar, and this one I like it. It's a nice sets the tone pretty perfectly. So as a general manager, what do your day-to-day responsibilities generally look like in the organization?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. There's kind of like different ways to look at what the GM job is. It kind of changes depending on the organization, and it also changes depending on the GM and their philosophy. I won't speak to like all of the options and like all of the pathways that exist, but I can speak to my philosophy. And my philosophy uh, is awful, and I pull it from Futurama, which is like there's an episode, and I don't know if you know the character, but Bender the robot gets like kind of like yeeted out into space, and he runs into like this like constellation of stars that can like emote and talk. And the idea, for the sake of the show and to save us the time, that constellation is supposed to be God. Like he discovers God. He finds him. He's like just some stars in space. And like the whole point of the episode, it's like he learns a lesson. He like tries to create his own little planet, and it like falls apart. And he tries to do his own thing, right? And it's basically God just saying like, "Look how hard my job is," right? And at the end, what the God stars say is like, you know, the point being proven was like trying to have too much impact or like over index on anything is like going to be bad, right? Just fundamentally. And the God Star constellation thing says like, if you do it right, people might not know you did anything at all. And that's kind of my GM philosophy, like running a team, is that like in theory, if I'm doing everything perfect and correct on my end with respect to like my hiring process, if I have the right people in the right place at the right time with the right skill set, in theory, I should be really bored all day. So my day-to-day responsibility should be doing absolutely nothing. Realistically, my job is to put out the fires. Like I'm supposed to know the problems before they pop up, and I'm supposed to like actively put them out. And if I'm doing my job really well, I'm like building a lot of redundancy and building a lot of like self-insuring pathways for my employees so that like I don't need to be pulled into literally everything that happens, because ultimately that's just going to create me as a bottleneck for anyone to do their jobs correctly, right? So if
Right.
you want to know my day-to-day responsibilities, technically nothing. In the context of this question, it's really basic. I'm watching scrims. I'm like connecting with my players, with my coaches, with our ops team, with our analyst group. We have a couple different external groups that we work through. I'm talking to finance. I'm talking to legal. Obviously, I'm talking to leadership, making sure that whatever the team is doing is like aligning with what Golden State wants out of the team. But ultimately, I'm the bridge between all of these different divisions and pieces. Well, and then, of course, in the offseason, I'm like hiring and rostering and building out what our coaching and player staff looks like.
Sure. So I had a little bit more to Noxwar's question as well. Then, so in your response, you mentioned one, and the first thing that stuck out to me is your employees, right? So in your organizational structure, because I think it's kind of confusing as a fan outside looking in, not fully understanding how a lot of these sports and esports orgs work.
Mhm.
Who are your employees? When you're saying people reporting up to you, people talking to you and feeding you information, who is that in the organization? Not necessarily like on a general sense, or if you want to name drop whoever it is, but who is that exactly that's coming up to you?
Yeah, so for me specifically at Golden Guardians, that's going to be my head coach, Nick Smith, in Arrow, as everyone knows him. His entire roster of coaches, of which there's like another 7 between LCS and Academy. And then in the 10 players, which waxes and wanes between 10 to 12 if you have like players transitioning through, out and around. Sometimes you've got amateur players floating through. And then, of course, the ops and analytics staff. Some of that crosses over. Like coaches have more than one responsibility. They're not just like exclusively coaching the game actively all day. Some of them handle our performance efforts. Some of them handle our analytics efforts. It's a little bit more robust than that. But if we're talking about the people that are reporting to me day to day, it's going to be the players, the coaches, and like what a lot of teams call team manager. I call that team operations, right? That's like the people who are making sure the players are like coordinated and scheduled on their activities day to day, making sure they're fulfilling like some really basic things that are like either required by Golden State or required and expected by the coaches or by Riot, the league.
Gotcha. Okay, that definitely helps put a little bit more color behind it too. I think the my other kind of follow up for that would be so on a corporate side or a more traditional job side, right? Like a person in your position, any manager sets for like their employees and also sometimes themselves from above them a set of KPIs or key performance indicators. Are you often doing that and finding yourself evaluating the like how are you going about evaluating the performance of your employees and yourself? I know for yourself, you kind of said that it falls on like how quiet your actual job tends to be. So like, are you a part of that KPI creation process for people reporting up to you, without giving too much of a look under the hood? Because I'm sure a lot of that stays internal. What are the kind of things you go to kind of look at the success of your employees with?
I imagine I can speak to some of this a little bit more direct. Yeah, of course, we've got like our internal KPI systems. We definitely judge certain things a little bit differently. It's really hard to like track players or coaches directly to like the traditional KPI structures that exist. Um, uh, Everyone's kind of memeing on it, but like there's a reason that like everyone understands that you probably can't do what the Immortals CEO was talking about the other day, which is like, just like throwing grades on a desk isn't really like a thorough or effective way of communicating. especially when you have the bandwidth like I think you should to actually just connect one-on-one and actually, you know, be like more constant in presence. We use like an HR tool, of course, that Golden State uses at a high level for the team op staff. You know, if we're like trying to talk about like the people that are keeping the team operating and existing, we go through like our standard like annualized HR reviews, quarterly reviews, and we have like set goals, like preset goals. We know for the most part what the projects are going to be in advance, so we can like align on how we want to like successfully fill on those projects. And then we like weigh ourselves against that. Separately, there's the obvious KPIs for me specifically, and in part the coaches who help me with some of this. There's of course like budgeting, right? Like every sports team is wrapped around, especially North America. The perpetual conversation is like budgeting and what you're spending your money on, how you're spending your money, whether you're like indexing further or heavier on infrastructure versus indexing heavier on coaches, like we do. Like we index massively on coaches. We have like way more coaches than everyone else. Or whether you're indexing on talent, right? Like if you're Team Liquid and you're just like indexing every single dollar you have um, proportionally towards your players, right? Like that is my responsibility ultimately, and that's something I hold myself accountable to on top of like and alongside with the coaches and players. Specifically with them, it's not as straightforward. Of course, it's not really like a system you can punch in. I can't really outline at the beginning of the year, um, like really intricate goals or details or projects that I know we're going to have because the nature of competitive sport is that it's evolving. The game is changing, and the expectations are changing based on what everyone else is doing. Right? There's 9 other teams also evolving alongside you the entire time, and so it's really hard to set yourself really exact or relative to any individual team. That's just kind of how it is. So yeah, if you're asking like how do we judge talent and how do we like judge the success, a lot of it's going to be through like the feedback systems. It's going to be talking to the players, talking to the coaches, and it's going to be like that experience over time.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, Noxwar, thank you for the question. And actually, I think that flows very nicely into the next one from Billowy Nickel. Excuse me. So Billowy Nickel asks if you were looking through applicants for a manager in esports, so you're in the position of hiring someone to have your job. What are the skill sets you'd want to see? And then what are some of the suggestions you might have that be a standout applicant? If you are the applicant, what are the things you're going to be looking for?
Well, I hope Billy Nickel is in chat because I actually have a kind of a retort question of what is manager mean to you? This has like been a struggle a lot of teams have worked through trying to answer, right? From my perspective, a manager like has hiring capacity and is like able to make decisions and ultimately should be held accountable for those decisions. It's not uncommon though that a lot of esport teams view managers more as like coordinators, like associate level. They're more just like, as I call it, team operations staff, people who are making sure like the word like the ship is moving forward. And they're not like spending a lot of time like negotiating salaries and like signing contracts and arguing with legal over the framework of the legalese that we're going to sign and any of that kind of stuff, like what I expect a manager to do. So I would first ask, if we can get that, what exactly manager means to you in the context of what I think a manager means. And we're saying like what skill sets we're looking for. The obviously, okay. Oh, we actually have a follow up, which is operations staff, not as executive team, more dealing with the management of operations. I mean, funny enough, that is like one of the like more entry level positions typically. I think I would like to get to where we could say that we could like build really robust operations staff and have like the opportunity to promote up and do a lot more there. But typically what happens is anyone who gets like really good at ops, doing like team ops ends up being like a manager, right? Like that's like inevitably where they go. And I don't think that necessarily has to hold true. I think it's just held true in that like those are the most available functional jobs for the position. With respect to like what skill sets you're looking for ops though, it's mostly responsibility. It's punctuality. Everyone knows, and this is not like me being snide. This is just honesty. Gamers inherently tend to be a little lazy. Um, they tend to miss the mark on like being on time for everything and being super responsible. Like everyone knows the like old LAN party jokes where no one's wearing deodorant when they go to like a DreamHack LAN. Um, Transparently, those aren't jokes. Like that's just unironically experiences people had in the first decade of esports that we've experienced, especially in North America. And because of that, The bar is like, I don't want to say the bar is low, but the bar is like uniquely flat. Like it's a very clear idea. If you could like, if you are like smart, concise, and responsible, I actually think you can be successful in operations. The hard part is that means a lot of people can be successful in operations at the outset. And the question is, where do you want to go from there? And that's what I look for in an operations person. When it comes to skill sets, I'm like, as long as you check the basic boxes, what I'm more interested in is like, what can you learn from this position that will propel you into what you want to do or what you want to be in esports? Because I just don't think right now it's like a long-term position to be in the first place.
No, I think I'll have to actually do the other side of that then. So based on how Billowy Nickel defined it more on the ops level, I do want to kind of jump on how you define manager as well, right? Like you're talking about like a decision maker, a person who's held responsible for the decisions they make. They ultimately have to answer for those decisions as well, just where like more associate levels don't. So I think you did a fantastic job answering Billowy Nickel's side of an actual ops person, an associate level person. What about for the manager then as well, as you define it?
Um, this has actually changed over time. I think if you asked me 5 years ago what you need to have and what you should be to be like an esports like legitimate like a manager, you need like a ton of esports know-how. Like you need a ton of like tangible experience in the esports space. You need to know the players. You need to know the talent. You need to know everyone at the league, right? Because everything is small enough to do that. 5 years ago, right? 5 years ago, I knew every single person pretty much in every single like major esport. Anyone who had like a name that had been on a broadcast somewhere, the space was still small enough to know those people. And that was like a significant part of your job because you were actually balancing the relationships with those groups. You're balancing your relationship with Riot, you're balancing your relationship with the other teams, and you're balancing your relationship ultimately with the players and staff. And back then, because the pool was so small and the ability to scout and find talent was so difficult, it wasn't like you could just like go find a solo queue player. Everyone knew that was like a basically impossible 5 years ago. You had to rely on your network. You had to rely on the players that you knew and trusted and respected. You had to rely on the coaches and the talent and the staff that you knew and trusted and respected. You needed to be able to look and understand their opinion. And that was like probably the biggest value you could bring to a team. And that's like ultimately how I found and built up my position, and how I've transitioned over time. That being said, the new version of this is that you actually don't need this anymore. You can hire people for this. There's enough people that are like capable of doing this. There's enough analysts in the space. There's enough there's enough scouts and there's enough tools, right? Like Riot and teams have done a better job building out these initiatives through scouting grounds, through ultimately Champions Queue. There's just more visibility everywhere, more eyeballs on everything. And so it's not exclusively on the manager to do all of this themselves. The stuff you need to know now to be successful in the space is probably what is like more recognized as the traditional sports management skill set. That's of course going to be like a really basic understanding of like the legal and contracting process, an understanding of the employment process based on like either the state you're in or more candidly California. Like the majority of teams skew towards California, which is like inherently more intricate employment laws typically. You need to actually be able to mostly manage the relationships at this point. Like the relationship management went from like kind of important a little bit to like paramount, right? Because everything is so much more complicated and intricate, and you're interweaving so many different groups between like finance and legal and your talent pool and your ops pool, all of the corporate divisions around like social media, marketing, sales, like everybody's interacting now, and you have to be able to balance that. So the biggest skill I would like outline is all of those like generic like business management skills, so that you know who to hire, like what scouts to pick up, what scouts to talk to pay, how to pay them, and you're not going to get in trouble with your lawyers at the end of the day because you paid them incorrectly.
No, it sounds like based on that, right? It sounds like it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like your very specific skill set to esports isn't going to be enough to differentiate you anymore. But as a result, it also means it probably broadened the scope of people who are hireable for the space. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're probably as wide as we've ever been.
Interesting. So, do you think as a result of the net being wider, do you also think it's then more competitive than it ever has been to find these kind of roles and to like fill these roles to make yourself a standout candidate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually very difficult for teams to even decipher what is or isn't a standout candidate. A lot of times it's more checking enough boxes to fit like whatever your minimum requirement is. And then from there, it's really just like an intricate process of interviewing and actually understanding whether someone has like a set of goals. And like, here's the crazy thing that people always kind of forget about sports. 9 teams, like, and not even gonna say 9. That's the LCS, right? There's 10 teams. Every single team but one is wrong. So like 99% of the people in the space are like kind of incorrect because they're not gonna win, right? But everybody is supposed to build towards and be winning, right? Now they're not always winning all of the time, but there has to be like an eventuality to it, right? There has to be like a period where you're expected to peak and you have to like in your head say, even though we're not a good team now, 3 years is like when we're going to do it. Um and that just means that like you have to kind of be okay with like the fact that everyone's wrong. So when we're saying like who stands out, the people that stand out are the ones that have like an idea, like with a direction, with like intent, because like you're not even going to get close without that. And ultimately, they might not get there, but they still could be the correct hire and been fantastic, right? The problem is the space is competitive, and like it's not 100% always in your control exclusively. So you might just unfortunately be a great person for the role, that was like one of the 9 teams that didn't win.
Happens. So I have to ask a follow up on that one that I think's got a lot to do with the scene. So real quick before I jump into that, would you consider like
Mhm.
Papa Smithy? Would he be an equivalent of like a peer for you at another organization, like a similar level in terms of roles and responsibilities?
Yep. Papa,
Okay,
we've actually got like a GM Discord, so I can list them all out. We've got Andrew Barton at
sure.
Evil Geniuses. We've got James Bakery at Dignitas. Jonathan Tran at Cloud9. I'm at Golden Guardians, obviously. Nick Fan at FlyQuest. Jonathan McDaniel at CLG. Immortals is a little more nebulous. I think they had their last 2 GMs left in the last like 6 months. So there's been turnover. I think right now the stand-in person is someone a lot of people know, Robert Yip, is like handling a lot of those conversations for them. Everyone knows Dodo at TL. TSM is kind of the same thing. They lost both their GM and their assistant GM, but then hired like a position above it and a position below. And so I would say like Dominic is the public facing person that popped up on Highline League. The person who's actually like day to day probably handling the League of Legends related GM responsibilities is Glenn, formerly the manager of I think PSG Talon. And then yeah, finally Papa would be the probably the last GM out of all of like my peers.
Okay, so I have to ask this as a follow up, and then I promise I'll jump to the next question from Billy Nickel as well. Um, the, One thing that sticks out as esports that's very different from traditional sports is the turnover
Mhm.
for management positions. It seems to be very, very rapid. And I think that, right, you'll see a lot of GMs when they step into sports, GMs and coaches, but I say more GMs, they go in with like a plan, right? Like they're given like a runway of 2 to 5 years to kind
Mhm.
of build what they're looking for in their vision. In esports, it seems like, I mean, just about every other year, it feels like someone's probably getting churned on some level. Is that a pretty big challenge for GMs in the scene to actually go forth with like a vision, present that vision to the organization, and then if they don't, Papa Smithy said in an interview, it's like it's a lot of in esports. What have you done for me lately? And does that kind of inhibit you guys from doing long-term strategizing for rolling out initiatives for organizations and building dynasties?
I actually don't agree with the perspective that there's a high turnover. I think management positions right now are the least turnover in the entire probably history of esports. Right now, the LCS has the vast majority of the same GMs it's had for years and years, and the times they've turned over wasn't like a manager turning over, like the entire organization turned over. I think like the like major changes we experienced, we've had like I think it's like the most extreme it's ever been just today. But if you said this like literally 2 months ago, it wouldn't be true. But that's only because like Parth left and the Immortals GM left, which has like just never happened. Historically, GMs never like step away, and it's very uncommon. What I will say is it might look like high turnover in that a lot of people that came into like what are titled manager positions weren't necessarily general managers, or if they were, their organization didn't empower them to actually make general manager level decisions. I think this is like a candidly a very public popular one. Everyone kind of knows that like Jack and Andy and Steve, like at the endemic older teams, it's not uncommon for the owner to be like way more involved, and therefore the GM might have some amount of decision making power, but ultimately it ends up usually yielding to the owner. And so they're just not as empowered. Now, that's like one side point, but it's not uncommon for whoever's titled GM or whoever's in like the management level position to not necessarily be a manager. They might just be an operations person who's mistitled, like a team ops person who does a great job holding the team together, like facilitating and completing on projects to make sure the team like just operates functionally day to day without like really having an eye or an idea for like propelling the team forward strategically and like making roster change moves, hiring different coaches. Like a lot of those people aren't necessarily actually tasked or expected or held accountable to that while having that management title. And I think if we've seen anything on that front about turnover, it's been those people actually working towards the jobs they actually want and should be in, with correct titling instead of just like perpetually leaving them as like managers when that's not what they were and not what they were supposed to be.
Okay, no, that offers a lot of clarity. So Billy Nickel, I know we spent a lot of time on that one, and I do love your follow up here as well. So, Danan, our next question also comes from Billy Nickel, and he wanted to know how what are the things you do in your day to day routine or life to develop your skills as a general manager? So, what are the things you do to stay sharp, to stay on top of things, and how do you continue to develop your skill set?
One of the things specific to me, but I imagine there's probably some people, some peers that would be able to relate to this. It's just connecting with the players and the staff. Being in sports inherently means that you just age out. That's just what happens. I've been doing this since I was like 17 or 18. I'm now about to crack 30. And I recognize and understand that like while I've gotten older and while like the average age of an LCS player has like gotten a little bit older, it's not one to one. The average age of the LCS is not going up one every single year. It's going up, like 0.25 or probably somewhere in the like the 0.6 range every year. Because of that, I really, really like to like index heavily on like interacting with the players, interacting with the coaches. That's not to say that I want to be like them, but I want to be able to understand them. It's really important to me that I'm actually on the ground, communicating, interfacing, like straight up emoting and being able to like obviously try to teach because I'm older and I can, um, but actually feel like I'm still connected and able to like do the things that they want to do because ultimately that's what you're always doing, right? Any team you're building is like the sum of its parts. Like you're trying to be, if anything, more than the sum of the parts of what your team is, and it's really important that your players and your coaches like feel like the genuine investment. Otherwise, you're not going to get like the actual earnest, honest feedback that you need from them to make the like critical decisions you have to make that like no one else is going to.
So it sounds like it's a lot of, it's kind of just a paraphrase, staying extremely in touch, but making sure you're not imitating, right? Like not dropping down, but staying in touch with what's going on.
Yep, the game is perpetually evolving. The players are also like going through growth and experiencing things differently. Every generation of players is going to be a little bit different, and it's really important for me. At least I like to set it as a priority to like see and understand why and be able to like connect and relate to them. Because how else am I going to be able to like attract good, young, capable talent to replace the players that are choosing that this life isn't for them anymore? That's like not an uncommon conclusion drawn year over year, and it's my job to like backfill those positions. It's my job to like sniff out and recognize the struggles that we are facing as a team, and a lot of the answers for those struggles are obviously going to be new players, new talent, and like a new perspective. And like we're not finding new older players. We're not like waking up and discovering a 29-year-old who's absolutely cracked at League of Legends, right? Because it skews young, and because it skews like passion and motivation, like the windows where people will like have that tend to skew in that range. And I just need to always be aware of like what they're thinking, how they're thinking, in order to actually do right by my entire staff.
Gotcha. So this goes into a pretty good one again. If it's that the next part of Billy Nichols' question is, he teased this up with, in just like in traditional sports, uh, general managers and management in general can face a lot of criticism for teams' failures, and sometimes get the praise for team successes, but very often are a point of criticism. And especially in league esports, it seems like the community is definitely not shy for picking up those pitchforks and torches and coming to the door of management. So how do you take that criticism and try to turn it into something productive when it does end up coming in your direction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's an interesting question, only because I chose to kind of put myself under fire. I went from like literally a what top 2, top 3 team, and I like made the like conscious decision to go to the literal double 10th place team, with like a purpose, right? I kind of went in expecting it, so it's not like this is not new, exciting, or interesting. Obviously, even at Cloud9 and prior Complexity and Dignitas, I went through periods where the team struggled, and I was able to like accept and understand the criticism and the pressure that's levied against the team when that happens. I don't know if I've just been lucky or what's going on really, but I think I've always just like done a really good job of having a lot of really supportive people around me, either from like the ownership level, from like the coaching level, from the player level. And that doesn't just go internally. That's not just Golden State. That's just like the community, the scene proper. I think anytime we experience a struggle, there's a lot of people that come a lot of people know and understand like what we're doing and how it's a little bit different sometimes than what other teams are doing. And so I think I've just maybe done a good job like building a lot of like buffer room, like a lot of space for what I'm trying to do in like a kind of unique and creative way. Um, and I can't really speak to the criticism being something that affects me. I really don't think about it too much. I'm not like a like I go on Reddit and I go on Twitter, but um those places have a lot of like angry, frustrated people already. So I'm not surprised if they like, turn that towards us. I just genuinely don't feel like there's been that much vitriol against us probably ever since I joined Golden Guardians. So it's hard to speak to it.
Actually, so along with that, then, so how do you go about? So you've got a nice buffer for where you've gone around it, and I think you're right. You guys have because you've had so much. I mean, candidly, congratulations as well. There's been a pretty tremendous amount of like palpable progress the organization has made. With that, how do you determine? How do you go about self-evaluation, and when do you determine what your successes are and what your failures are, and how do you like kind of navigate those high and low points that come with it? So what's your self-evaluation process? What do you chalk up to successes? What do you chalk up to failures? And then what degree of ownership do you take in those successes and failures from the team?
For mine specifically, it's a couple different buckets. One of like the big ones that I think a lot of people don't pay too much attention to is I like to weigh my success just kind of like generically on the success of the people around me. So that's not to say that like I individually succeed. It's really hard to like point at a GM and say that individual person succeeded, right? Like no one like sees or understands our contracts, how much we're being paid, whether like it like whatever our salary is justifies what we're doing. So it's not like a player where a lot of times like that's known, right? It's like not uncommon to know if a player's paid high, paid low, and like where and how they fit, if they're like a role position player for their team or not. Because I don't have that, what I like to judge myself on is everyone else's success, right? Like I like to look at it and say like obviously one is the team winning. Of course, that's always like one of the main questions you're going to ask, but it's never just that simple, right? Not all teams can win. So if we judge every single GM based on whether a team is winning, 9 GMs are failing miserably and one of them is winning, right? And that's not like that's not real. That's not functional. And we could try to like vaguely say, like okay, well then the top 5 GMs are good and the bottom 5 GMs are bad, right? But again, that doesn't really do it because like everyone is given a different set of circumstances and starts like at a different spot, right? When you're a new GM for a team, sometimes you walk into the team and it's team liquid. Like you just have like literally 5 of the best players that the region's ever been graced with all at the same time. Um and like your job is mostly just to not break it, right? Like that's not uncommon. On the reverse, it could be like what I did, right? Where I came in and I took a team that had no like functional power in the space, like very little in respect to assets to turn over, very little like optimism or brand power. What I would call like brand equity in the space was like, at a kind of an all-time low at that time. Um, and so like I'm obviously going to be weighed differently than whatever GM has like the superstar set of players, right? I really try to focus on everyone else's success. And that includes people that aren't here anymore, right? When like a player or a coach or even a staff member leaves Golden Guardians, I pay a lot of attention and I care and I really track what's happening and where they're going, what they're doing. And I like to like be optimistic and say like they're doing really well. Um, Actually, I can example this. This is how I know whether I'm successful and I feel like I am. I hired a ton of people at Cloud9 a little while before I knew I was probably going to leave at some point, right? It was understood like I was carrying like a lot of work at the time, and so I backfilled a lot of people over the course of like 2 years in advance of my eventual departure. And I like to highlight like those people went on and ultimately either found success at Cloud9 or like were promoted into other organizations or ultimately left Cloud9 and found their success somewhere else in a big way. And I like to think that I was like a part of that. I like to think like they came up under my wing. I gave them like I taught them a lot of what they know and how they do their business. Um, and I like to like think that because they're all successful, that's like an indicator that I was doing something right. I would also highlight this works in reverse. This is probably how I assume Jack at Cloud9 has always viewed his success. And I wouldn't be surprised if Hunter here at Golden Guardians also feels the same way. These were my last two bosses, like Hunter now and Jack previously. Hopefully they see like the success I experience as part of what they taught me and like they yield a return on that. And that's just like probably the biggest thing I care about. I want my academy players, whether they're mine now or in the past, to make LCS, right? I want my LCS players, whether they're mine now or in the future, to win a LCS championship. Like I think a lot of people obviously were like, "Oh man, Golden Guardians are really like sad that 100 Thieves, like the was like 3 or 4 of our players went and won a championship pretty quickly after we sold them towards 100 Thieves." It's the opposite. We were thrilled for them. like like that was super sick. We knew exactly what they wanted to do. We were sad we weren't able to fulfill on it, of course, like on the side. But like the overwhelming emotion was like just being insanely proud. Like that was like the coolest thing on the planet that like we kind of broke the like cycle of all of the endemic teams just winning over and over and over. And we actually got to like get one of the new teams, in this case 100 Thieves, across the finish line. That's super sick. So that's like what I weigh myself against. And then separately, yeah, of course, I'm always paying attention to like our budget relative to our performance. I know like somehow Travis Gafford always like manages to like acquire some salary doc thing that usually isn't very accurate. And like you can
Ooh,
always
okay.
you can always see like whether it is or isn't accurate is irrelevant to me. It feels good that like even with its inaccuracies, we usually skew towards the top. Ever since I've been here, we've been one of the teams that like is very cost efficient on winning. Like we do a good job spending our money, and we typically do a good job like not only overperforming probably our budget, but especially overperforming people's expectations. We like to like think that it's not uncommon for us to just like always put forward a team that is like just notably better than the sum of its parts.
In very much 2014, 2015 Warriors fashion, might I point out
Yeah.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. So the last part of Billy Nichols' question was, so we talked about the self-reflection. Ah, sorry. So I'm tacking this one on for him. I apologize. Uh, so yeah, Golden Guardians, you guys are rounding out is it year 4, right?
Oh, what year is it? 22? Yeah.
2022. Yeah,
Something like
man,
that.
old life. Uh,
Ooh.
What so in your 5-year plan in this role, right? I think most people, that's kind of like the general incremental way you look at careers, right? Like
Yep.
you set your 5-year plan, you
We've had 7,
evaluate, you
10.
kind of go. So yeah, whatever it is. So 7 to 10, 5 to 7, whichever one you peg it. When you round out your goals, what are you going to look back and you're going to go, okay, this is the single thing that I think made me successful in this role. I think you talked a lot about it with what the impact you left on Cloud9. Is that the continual thing you want to do through Golden Guardians, or do you have a more specific goal that you're okay sharing?
I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a weird question because like I'm not gonna lie, I'm not one of those people that like lives to work conceptually. That's not what I do. I'm competitive, right? Like I want to win. So like I think a lot of people from like their perspective, the argument of like whether you're successful is like did you like make a lot of money, right? Like some GMs might get some like equity because the team did well and like the valuation pumps to $300 million and they get a piece of that, right? I don't really like attach myself to like any of that. Obviously I like to try to have like a good living situation for myself, for my wife, and for our dog. But beyond that, yeah, like I'm absolutely gonna tether myself to like whether the team does or doesn't win. That being said, we live in like really weird, unprecedented times. So I've been trying not to be too hard on myself as though I had like absolute unequivocal authority and control over every single outcome, right? Like it would be great if it was as easy as like it's Danan's fault, like we didn't press R in a certain team fight or something. But it's never like that straightforward and that basic. And especially with like the like turnover of LCS franchises, which I feel like automatically creates like massive instability in the space. I think every time we like lose an organization from like top to bottom, right? Like that's an Echo Fox, that's like an Optic thing. Whenever those happen, I feel like that adds like, you know, 15% of variation into whatever you were doing at the time, minimum, right? Now, when three of them turn over, that's catastrophic. That's like the entire scene upends. And that's what we saw, right? Like that entire like 24-month stretch afterwards was like a really wacky, weird, backwards reality. We're kind of experiencing another shockwave of that. Like the like weird like Jensen isn't in the league and Jizuke gets like all pro and isn't in the league and like Ignor's like obviously a good player and he's not in the league. Like all of these like weird trickle down effects of like not being like a mature existing structured space make things a little bit more complicated. So I always try to like look at my success through the lens of like how did things go ignoring the crazy outlier weird things that happen, and I like to think that I've been doing a pretty good job. Like again, everyone's going to point to the easy one, which is like we built what is clearly like an LCS championship caliber roster under the Golden Guardians umbrella, and then just sold it to 100 Thieves like minutes before it crossed the finish line. Like that just, you know, and that's a COVID, that's like a COVID earthquake that happened, right? Across the entire system. That wasn't just like a Golden Guardians experience. You can go back and look at esports over the last like 36 months and see a lot of weird, wacky, backwards things that happened at every layer from like the business side to the competitive side as a result of that. So I'm always like trying to give myself cushion around that. Um, but specifically to that, I like to think I've been doing all right.
Perfect. Billowy Nickel, thank you a ton. That was a lot of good content we got from that. So Dana, next up, we've got a question from Jake. This is a little bit of a step away from your career in a general manager role, but still relevant in that you are a hiring manager. So Jake asks, how would you go about getting an internship under management for esports without being in an MBA program? Since it looks like, and you have to validate this, most of the internships require an MBA. What could someone do to kind of stand out in this regard and be hireable and looked at as an intern position?
Yeah, it's really challenging. This question is really good because it kind of points to a flaw we have in the space, and that is like there aren't really entry level like positions that like build you into a management opportunity. I think there's also been like a mistake made in the past where like due to nepotism and due to like the like the innate incestuousness of the space, a lot of people like came into manager positions that just weren't managers. Like not even necessarily to a fault of their own. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them and all to do with everything else that's happening. Um, because of that, like it's really hard to like say, you know, just like be a really good candidate and you'll find your way to like an academy team, right? Like I mean, this is my challenge. I promoted my assistant GM, Jonathan, for like 5 years, right? He was with me at Cloud9. I left Cloud9. He eventually left Cloud9 and joined me at Golden Guardians and was my assistant GM there for like 3 years, and then has now been promoted to the GM for CLG, Logic Gaming, right? Um, we can look at that and say like that's what should happen, but like transparently, it does sound, look, and feel like finding him in the first place was a bit of a stroke of luck. Like he came in as like an analyst who was like a friend of a player who knew someone who kind of like just like vibed. And back then you used to use like TeamSpeak, so you didn't have like all of these like private little discords. You had a lot of like rooms that you just like, sat in with people, and it wasn't as like privatized as it is now. And so like finding someone like that was like not, I didn't go through like a whole thing and find a whole thing and do a whole thing. It was very much like a you know, luck and circumstance. We needed hands, and his hands were in the space, right? Nowadays, I think if you want to find that pathway, if you want to like intern or do something, League of Legends is a terrible space to start in. I'm gonna be honest. Like we did a really clunky job, like a franchising level. The league and everyone from there did a really bad job like facilitating and supporting the amateur environment. Everyone knows their like amateur just like died for like 5 years and is now being slowly rebuilt on the like foundation that is like the proving ground circuit. But because of that, we just we kind of headshot every like entry level like manager esque position. Um, And that makes it so like that's where we would pull from. That's where we would do it. Simultaneously, it meant there weren't resources put into having people like assistant GMs. Like what John did for me for a long time was really abnormal. There aren't a bunch of these positions. There's almost none of these positions in the entirety of the league right now. A lot of teams like double up their coach as like the manager. They just like let their coach make all of the decisions, and there isn't like a program with like a thought process to it. It's just like a coach just like unilaterally signing players he wants to work with. Um, because of that, my advice would actually be go look at a different esport that has like more grassroots access, like stuff on the ground that you can actually get your hands into and be part of the process. Pick up what skills you can from there, and then look for your transition angle either into the amateur circuit for League of Legends or especially Academy. I think a lot of teams like over the next 3 to 5 years are absolutely going to be more robust on the Academy amateur side. Um, I think you already see bits and pieces of this with Immortals, with 100 Thieves, with C9. And I have optimism that as we continue to grow those spaces, that's when those positions will open up. And I just don't think we're going to hire from inside the League of Legends sphere overnight. I think we'll be looking at people who have like already picked up some like esports experience, whether that's like operations or not, business side of things, and try to build them into management level people for League of Legends instead of just pulling like league fanatics, like people who like know and understand exclusively League of Legends, when that's like not a pathway that really exists anymore.
Perfect. Thank you, Jake. Hope that captured it pretty well. Dana, I think you knocked that one out of the park. So the next one is actually from Ethan V123, and they ask, and I'm gonna answer them. I'm gonna actually pivot their question a little bit. So they're asking, can you tell us some more about your biggest accomplishments through your career and the milestones that got you to where you are now? I think you mentioned a lot of those. Just as a quick rehash, like you talked about the precedent you set at Cloud9 and the infrastructure you left behind and helped build up on your way out. You took a 10th place back-to-back org to I don't think ever being in 10th place ever again, and even qualifying for playoffs often. And then you created what is now still the infrastructure of 100 Thieves' most competitive roster they've ever birthed. And I think you mentioned each of those. So I'm actually going to pivot Ethan's question a little bit. If you were going to apply for a new GM position, right? So if you're going to
Mhm.
the next thing away from Golden Guardians, what are the three things you're going to belt off as these are the things I've done that make me uniquely qualified for this position?
Actually, I'll say it's a little hard to answer that because it would depend on what I'm doing, right? If I was still doing general manager type work, if I was still doing like roster building and coach hiring, um, that's that's easy and obvious, right? Like I am still, I think, the only North American CS:GO major champion manager. Like fundamentally, I don't think that's ever been matched before or after. Like I think North America hadn't won a CS:GO international event for like 11 or 12 years until me and the guys won uh like
The
EPL
Boston major,
season
right?
4. No. So first EPL season 4 in Brazil, and then
Okay.
we followed that up with an even more impressive feat, which was the Boston Major. Yeah. Um, like we ended the 12-year drought and then followed it up with the only major we've ever seen and still haven't been like that still hasn't been followed up with yet, right? That's obviously an easy one. Um, Obviously like the most successful worlds run we've seen in League of Legends for North America, right? With Cloud9, and not just once, but like repeatedly. Everyone knows the Cinderella run and everyone knows the semifinals run. Like those are just like things. And then
So cool.
finally,
So cool.
and then of course like there's like tons of little ones that are really easy. I can always throw out like I won like 8, 9 bajillion little like lands and events and like the first ever Overwatch event in the history of the world, which was like 6 teams. But I did absolutely put together and work very closely on like the rostering, the staffing for the London Spitfire, who won not only the first stage championship. If you don't know Overwatch, it's like multiple stages per year, so that's like saying a split, right? The first ever split for Overwatch. And then yeah, I don't know if anyone knows like, Overwatch World Champion, right? Like we won both the first stage and the championship. We didn't win stage 2, I don't want to talk about it. Um but like yeah, like the World Championship there, right? Those are like the easy accolades I can throw for GM level things. Um if I'm doing something that's not GM work, like it's a pretty easy sell. Like I was like pretty integral to like the early years of Cloud9 was like, like 4 of us in a room. That was it for like a long time. And I helped build out a lot of like a little bit of everything that they eventually became. Now, obviously, they are like a behemoth in like 100 different directions for 100 different reasons that have nothing to do with me. but I have like a ton of experience on the startup and like on the competitive esports side of things, especially like on the business partnerships, sales, marketing, social media, like merchandising, a little bit of everything. Like I had my hands in and like was very involved in at Cloud9. I wasn't just the general manager there. Like I think everyone could confidently know and say that. So if I was looking for a job that wasn't like management, yeah, it's I don't think it's too hard of a sell.
Perfect. Ethan, I know I pivoted that a little bit, but I hope it still worked out for you. So Dana, we're coming back to Jake now. And I think you talked about this one a little bit earlier as well. So that's what I'm gonna dial it in and make it extremely specific. So Jake wants to know what you consider the most valuable trait to have in a management position. And I'm gonna hold you to that, like the most valuable trait. So the one paramount trait you
This is
need
easy.
is
This is easy. This isn't
nail
even.
it.
This is the
I'm ready.
easiest. You have to be personable. Like you have
I
to be.
love it.
You just have to be. Like you're like sometimes you're like a super public figurehead, right? That's gonna be Papa Smithy. Like that literally what he was before. He was like a talent person. He was like on the team on the talent on broadcast. So you have to come in with some capacity for that. You don't have to be the best, but you do have to be capable. So that like speaks to being personable. You have to be a salesman. Like whether that's like actual sales, like convincing companies to give you money to pay for what you're doing, or more specifically as a GM, you have to be able to sell players and coaches and staff that your organization is where they should bring their talent. Like that, like you can not only like take in their talent, but you can accelerate it. You can grow them. You can make them more robust and more valuable. Like you can give them more than you end up taking, right? Like that's something you have to be able to sell them on. And being personable is massive. Like you just have to like people have to want to be around you. You have to have kind of an infectious attitude, right? Like, and you have to like balance it to not be too crazy. I'm gonna be honest. I'm too crazy. I just there's hopefully no one that's like too much more crazy than me, and it ends up being okay for now.
No, that's I love that you said that because you've talked a lot through the night, and I feel like one thing that's come up consistently is you're kind of measuring what the personableness, but also like some level of like emotional and social intelligence
Yep.
for you to
Yep.
stay in touch with the players. I'm gonna go back because we asked this question a little bit. Is there anything you do to kind of flex that muscle a little bit? Do you tap into any resources to kind of work on your ability to be emotionally intelligent, to be socially intelligent, and equipped to kind of interact and stay in touch with with your employees and players?
I want to be honest, no, and that's not like a good answer. Like that's not something people should do. I got insanely lucky. I just like have the innate capacity to like interface with people and it to go well. I don't like I didn't like do a thing to get there. I've always been like kind of the golden child in the family that could just like interact with anyone and usually have a good time. I'm pretty moldable to the circumstance of whoever I'm interacting with. It's really hard for me not to get along with someone. Even if they don't like me, even if they fucking hate me. It's not uncommon for me to not like reciprocate that feeling. It's not uncommon for me to be like, I get it. I understand it. I totally understand if people find me like annoying and say I talk too much. And I know High's tweeting shit about that before we even start, saying that I'm gonna talk for more than an hour. I've got 8 minutes left. I'm gonna be on time. So like I no, there's like nothing I do. I will say like sometimes it like if I get better at it, it's just because like I'm forced to. Like I'm in an environment where I'm interacting with people all day, every day, and like you can never afford to be like the GMs that don't find success and struggle and eventually do fall out. Like you've talked about that turnover, tend to be the ones that like spiral into the struggle, spiral into the toxicity, and they're not able to like maintain the front, right? Like I think a lot of what I end up doing is like not showing or explaining or like clarifying the cracks and the struggles that we're facing, like face forward, right? Like I'm not like just telling every single person their problems like unilaterally, like active criticism daily. Um, it's really about like being able to understand the problems, seek them out, and fix them without anyone even realizing there was a problem in the first place, right? And part of doing that keeps me fresh, like keeps me on it, teaches and trains me every single day to keep it up.
Dan, I'm going to attack one piece on there for Jake with that because I think you're definitely in the rare breed of people who don't have to go out and seek that skill set out. So Jake, I will shamelessly plug, even though I'm not in esports, shamelessly plug two things I think are really helpful. One is the Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, and particularly seeking first to understand. rather than coming in with a pre-notion, seeking first to understand where someone else is saying or coming from. So definitely helps with that emotional and social intelligence. And then the second one that is at least beneficial for management for me, and something they leverage pretty actively at my company, is the strength finders, and kind of understanding one, your own personal motivations and strengths, and then using that to kind of understand how you can find those strengths in other people and better interact with them. So two things I'll throw out there is just easy weekend reads if you ever need to pick them up, and I think there's probably free versions of them scattered around the web as well. So Danan, we're coming up pretty close to this 9 o'clock. We're teeing up the last two questions we've got from the community, and I think Jake actually teed up Ione and Ninetales very nicely with their question about the valuable traits for management. You kind of started talking about what you have to do to be successful. Ione and Ninetales wants to know, what specifically do you have sway and influence over from a decision making standpoint? So they specifically talk about like roster decisions, staffing decisions, infrastructure decisions. What are the things that actually fall under your scope for what you impact with your day to day decision making, long term or day to day?
So I can be pretty clear with this one. The reason I came to Golden Guardians was they could give me something that I think a lot of other teams weren't comfortable or capable of doing, which was like just the unilateral power of decision making over every facet of their League of Legends initiatives. Just fundamentally from the ground up, from like the infrastructure to the staffing to the rostering to the hiring to the budgeting. Like I have the capacity to eat every single thing out the window if I get bored for like any reason. I like to think I'm not that irresponsible, obviously, and I assume a lot of people trust me because they came here anyways, knowing this. But yeah, like when it comes to like anything League of Legends related with respect to the Golden State Warriors, like that's me. Like I have that capacity. That being said, no, of course, every roster move and every hire is not just Danon in a vacuum in a corner doing a thing, specifically only me doing a thing. I am like very collaborative. I'm really democratic in a lot of my approaches to like how I take feedback, and how I like send back my thoughts, and ultimately how we end up like pathing out as an organization what we're doing. Um, but like, yeah, in a vacuum, if I wanted to do something, I could do in theory everything.
That's pretty fascinating. So Ione and Ninetales, thank you very much. And Dana, we are rounding out with the final question from Caustic. I'm so sorry, friend, if I'm saying your name incorrectly. But this might be my favorite question we've gotten so far of the evening. So, what role do you main in League of Legends?
I've been a support player since the dawn of time. I have like, I'm not kidding. I have like an ancient screenshot that I accidentally tripped over in my folders on my computer the other day. Of I'm like playing against like, maybe it's like Double Lift, and maybe it's Steve from Liquid, and
Oh,
like
two washed pros. Two washed
I can't
pros.
remember if it was Afro or Muffin Cutie. Like some of these names you might recognize. Tree Eskimo. Oh, Phantom Lord. Everyone knows Phantom Lord. Yeah, I have like an old screenshot from like those matches back in the day. Yeah, I've always been a support player. Like I like to think I can play a little bit of anything at like a reasonable level. Transparently, I don't play League of Legends really much anymore. I probably for the first time in like ever in a long time, I played a bunch of games like yesterday and the day before, but that's like abnormal. It's not uncommon for me to go like an entire year without playing more than like 20 or 30 games.
Maybe I need to play less games of League of Legends. Well, TSMU
I'd love
community,
to play
you
more.
did you probably hard to come by time on your schedule. That's what I would
Yeah,
imagine.
it's definitely time constricted and like the efficiency of what I'm doing. That being said, it's really cool because I've mastered the ability to not tilt. Like League of Legends just doesn't affect me anymore. Like obviously watching the games is like I feel 1,000 more emotions watching my team compete than I ever do playing the game myself.
It's a different competitive outlet now, right? Your rank
Yep.
doesn't matter. Your team's standing matters.
Yep. Exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, TSMU community, you heard it here. If you want to be a successful GM, you have to be a support main in League of Legends. It's actually OP is what it's looking like.
Yeah,
So,
surprisingly, you're not wrong. It skews that direction.
well,
I
perfect.
just like to
Danon,
think we're more cerebral about the game.
you have to
You
be
know?
right. You're
Yeah.
you're like you're the
It's just
person who has to
core.
be
I'm
everywhere
the
else.
core JJ of GMs.
You heard it here. So, producers, I hope you clip that for sure and post it just about everywhere.
If Jusung is watching, I'm the Ole of GMs.
There you go. Well, everyone, thank you so much for attending. That fantastic Q&A. It's pretty awesome. Dana is a fan of yours. It's been a fantastic to spend the hour talking with you. So thank you
Yeah,
for
no, this
spending
is
the
great.
hour with me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. This is a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone else, just as a reminder, this is a regular series that TSMU does and a fantastic resource for everyone. So there will be another one of these Q&As next Wednesday, April 10th, or April 20th, excuse me, April 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with a person who's very near and dear to my heart and many others, Ali Hahi, who's the marketing programs manager and creator of TSMU. So be sure to tune in next week for that very special Q&A with Ali. Don't forget to follow the Twitch channel. So you know exactly when this goes live. And if you're not already involved in the community, please be sure to join the Discord for TSMU. So that's discord.gg/TSMU. Tons of awesome activations going on. There's things like resume reviews, game nights, these fantastic Q&As where you get nice and involved with people in the community that otherwise you might not have a connection to. And it is all perfectly accessible to you. So just drop in discord.gg/TSMU. Danan, thanks again. And thanks again, everyone, for having me. I hope you have a great night.